Chapter 61. Admissions. By the bloody 9, Kai whispered to himself. Standing at the Elder Ward Prime Academy entrance, Kai found himself stopping to gawk at the sight. Built right into the decline of a valley, the buildings looked simple at first glance. Stone built onto the stone, nothing screamed extravagant or prestigious. A short and plain stone wall stretched onto his left and right. Even his 8-year-old self could have climbed over it easily. How can this be one of the prestigious prime academies? He whispered to himself in disbelief. There was a certain timelessness about the academy, as if time remained frozen to keep it so simple, like it was openly deceiving those who came to visit one of the most prestigious academies, only to find themselves in a quaint old village instead. It was quite beautiful, and the simplicity of it reminded Kai of home. But for an academy of notoriety and legend, it seemed wrong. Kai stood there confused. He wasn't the only one. Others who had disembarked from the train also appeared at a loss, while some walked in without concern. Taking a deep breath, he stepped through the threshold. Immediately he was beckoned over by a guard he had not seen from the other side. "Admissions or visitor?" the guard asked swiftly. The same question probed his mind. Off to the side, other beings were called off the path and being asked the same question, while others kept walking down the path, unbothered. Kai blinked his eyes and identified again. Nothing. He found himself slightly unsettled by the fact that he had no idea what race or species of being he was standing in front of. The unknown being was covered head to boot in armor with the same texture of wood. The smooth armor gave the illusion, or possibly reality, that someone had carved it straight from a tree trunk. All that was visible of the mysterious guard were its red eyes through the helmet slit. "Admissions," Kai responded, after probably gawking too long. Twisting its body, it held up an armored arm and pointed to a house-sized grey stone building behind it. "You'll find the admissions office inside." Turning away, it had already begun beckoning another potential student or visitor to it. Kai thanked the guard with a nod and walked off. To his side, Asteria trotted with him, looking adorably confused. Stepping inside the moderately sized doorless building, Kai had to double-take. The inside of the lobby itself was larger than the entirety of the building's appearance from the outside. Varying species filled the lobby, some were sitting and others walking around. Decorative and exotic furniture gave appearance to a more modern and wealthier scene, the complete opposite of its outside representation. Large marbled pillars propped up the massive room, and art and paintings were against each pillar and wall. Each depiction was either of a battle or a portrait of an individual. None were human. One portrait was of a wizened male elf with extremely bushy eyebrows. On the plaque below it read, "Arewyn Tellis, inventor and creator of the Tellis conversion of mass enchantment principle. Graduate of Elderwood Prime Academy. Born 3-3-8-9-2, died 4-021. What the... If Kai was reading the dates right, then the elf in the portrait had lived a minimum of 16,000 years. Possibly much longer, depending on when the Third Age ended. The date was currently in the Sixth Age of the year 2155. Humans had only arrived in the myriad of worlds less than 1,300 years ago. To have been alive for 1,300 years, let alone 16,000. The concept of it was difficult to fathom. A stray thought came to mind. Kai couldn't help but wonder if he would still have remained alive to this day if he hadn't been betrayed. Statistically, the answer was no. But his blood magic class had always done a great job at healing him during fights. Short of losing a limb, he was almost unstoppable in a fight, outlasting his opponents. Now he had no regeneration or healing. It was an entirely different style of combat that he was still growing accustomed to. After checking out a few other portraits, Kai knew it was time to head over to admissions and get it over with. His body felt jittery, likely full of excitement at the prospect of one of his goals becoming reality. Calling Asteria, who was eyeing paintings of battles, they walked to a separate room where the admissions office was located. Crossing into the room, he took note of everything. There were 10 glass offices, 9 of which had distorted glass, similar to the train, but cloudier. Each office had varying species assembled in front of them. Among the 60 beings in the room, only one other was human. Placing Asteria around his neck, Kai strolled to the back of one of the lines. He tried to listen to the conversations around him, but no sound reached him. Even Asteria's huff seemed dampened, despite her being next to his ear. It didn't take long until he was next in line, with each individual taking 10 to 15 minutes. The glass to the office unblurred as the door slid open. A dwarf left the office, practically skipping to the exit. Stepping inside the office, the room felt sweltering compared to the chilled lobby. Kai sucked in air and stopped himself from laughing as he saw a hulking orc hunched over behind a disproportionately small desk. Come in, and close the door," the orc spoke without looking. His voice was deep and clear, without the slightest detectable accent. Closing the door, Kai blinked when the glass didn't blur like before. Just as Kai was about to grab the door and try to open and close it again, the orc said, "Leave it. The enchantments are working. It's not frosted from the inside." There was an amused smirk on the tusked orc's face, which was still facing toward the papers he was writing on. Taking the seat opposite the orc, Kai took the time to examine the orc while the being finished his task. Even with them both being seated, the orc easily towered 2 feet over him. He might have been intimidated, if not for the silly tunic that had been cut at the sleeves to give room to his bulging muscles that would even put Sven to shame. A hexagonal insignia of a pair of hands with some kind of spell between them rested at the center of the tunic, above and below which read Elderwood Prime Academy and Admissions. The office was filled with piles of papers reaching the ceiling that seemed to have no reason or order. Mana gave life to the glowing lights above. "Sorry about that. This time of year there is always a lot of paperwork," the orc said as he shuffled some pages into a desk drawer. Offering a massive hand across the desk, he completely enveloped and shook Kai's hand with a gentleness that he would not have expected in such a muscular and hulking specimen. "My name is Timothy, an admissions specialist here at Elderwood Prime Academy. To get the ball rolling, will you please tell me your name?" "Kaismo Cineris, and this is Asteria." He placed his hand on top of the small fox's head, sitting on his lap. With his other hand, he subtly pulled at his collar to alleviate some of the heat and sweat forming below his clothing. "Pleasure," Timothy let out a toothy smirk. "I apologize for the heat. My blood boils. It's not something I can control. We will wrap this up quickly and get you out of here." "Kaismo, I take it you are trying to enroll here. First year?" "Yes and no." Kai shook his head. "I already completed my first year at the Ashbourne Academy on Eris." The orc's eyes widened. "Ashbourne Academy, you say? Ah, I was sorry to hear about its destruction." Kai's went wide for a second before narrowing. "You know about its destruction?" "Of course. Even the destruction of capital on a low world is big news in the myriad of worlds. Normally we would require enchanted paperwork to provide proof of first-year completion." Timothy ran his large hand under his chin, causing his arm muscles to swell even more. The tunic looked like it was about to rip apart. "But it is obvious you wouldn't have any with the academy being destroyed." Opening the top desk drawer, he placed a crystal cube on the desk between them. "Because you are enrolling as a second year, we will have to perform a small test. Before enrolling, students must not have had access to their magic longer than 3 years. 'Tis the rules. The Prime Academies are education systems aimed at the newly awakened. Because you are entering the second year, it will be 4 years for you." Tapping the seamless crystal cube at the top, it generated a small hum for a few seconds before stopping. "Excellent," Timothy exclaimed. "According to the cube, your skeletal structure is only 17 years of age, bringing you within the appropriate age bracket for your species. Forging level 24, not too shabby for 1 year of magic and coming from a frontier world." Timothy nodded to himself. "And your companion, Forest Fox, between 1 to 2 years old, foundation level 65. Good." Kai felt his heart speed up for a moment until he heard Timothy confirm his physical body's age and not the age of his soul. He realized now that his most precious and kept secret could have been found out in that moment had they measured the age of his soul. A part of him wanted to admonish himself for being lax and letting his guard down, but the logical side of him knew that there was nothing he could have done. He had not been aware such a test would be taking place after all. His fear abated when he realized Asteria had jumped onto the desk. He went to grab her, but Timothy waved him off without looking. Gingerly, Asteria placed her paw on top of the mysterious cube, only for nothing to happen. Dejected, she hovered near Timothy, taking interest in what he was writing down. Bringing in an additional companion, even a non-combatant pet, will cost additional fees, Timothy said. Kai chuckled and mumbled, "Nothing new there." Timothy let out what looked like a menacing smile, but Kai assumed it was just the orc's normal smile. "Sounds like an interesting story." "A very long story," Kai answered back. "Before I forget, I believe someone is sponsoring my attendance here." Timothy whipped his head up, his hand frozen over the paper. "You should have mentioned that. We could have skipped the last few minutes. What is the name of your sponsor?" Pulling out the piece of paper his father gave him, he read the name, Niles Endo. "Paragon Niles is sponsoring you." Uncertainty in his voice, he gave Kai a more critical gaze, as if he was looking deep to find something he couldn't see. "Paragon? Wait, Paragon? Does Dad have a Paragon realm person sponsoring me?" Kai frantically read the paper over one more time, but nothing indicated the sponsor's realm. "My father set up the sponsorship. I don't know if this Niles Endo is the same one to whom you are referring." Frowning, Timothy stood up. "Stay here. I will be right back." Now standing, the orc was even larger than Kai had imagined. The small desk did no justice to the small titan of an orc. Stalking out of the room, the doorway barely seemed big enough as he quickly left. The door remained open, and Kai could see other potential students spying on him from outside in line. After a minute of sitting quietly, he decided to question Asteria. "You know anything about this?" "I'm 1.5. You think they told me any of this?" She rolled her eyes. Just as Kai was about to retort, the door slid open with Timothy came back inside, carrying a file he didn't have before. "I found it," he said, slapping a folder against his palm. I was certainly surprised. We only get about 50 to 100 sponsored students a year. Sitting back in the chair, the orc sunk back to manageable heights so that Kai didn't feel an ache in his neck having to look up. "Yup, it's all here," Timothy said, reading the files inside. "Your classes have already been settled, along with payment. Everything looks in order. We can skip a few steps, it seems." He passed Kai the file after slipping in a packet of papers. Kai accepted the file and opened it up to take a look. The first page included nearly everything about him: his name, description, class, and magic type. Even his unfinished finals appearance from a few days ago was included inside. Intrigued, he flipped to the next page, which included his courses and their locations for the trimester. They all revolved around fighting and monster hunting, except for the Myriad of Worlds history class. He noticed there was nothing similar to the field training course from the Ashbourne Academy. How are the students supposed to grow in levels? "I've included a packet in the back of your file with relevant information, including the rules, most of which will be covered during orientation. I believe the next one will be 1 hour from now in the assembly hall. If you miss that one, then the next will be on the Marrow at midday." Kai took the file and papers and placed them in his ring of storage. He had taken a few minutes on the train to figure out how to store items. It proved easy at first, but placing an item exactly where he wanted inside the ring wasn't something he had been able to figure out before they arrived. Questions filled Kai's mind, but he figured most of them would be answered by reading the packet inside or by going to the orientation. Timothy's reached out to the metal plate he had placed on his desk a minute prior and waved his hand. Immediately the plate began glowing with beautiful glyphs. It looked more like art than the language of magic to Kai's untrained eyes. "Touch the plate and it will record your mana and biological signature. Then you will officially become a student of Elder Ward Prime Academy." Kai placed his palm against the metal. It was hot to the touch and kept getting hotter until he had to rip his hand away. Holding his palm to his face, there was nothing to indicate he had just been burned. Even his health hadn't dipped despite the pain. Timothy's waved his hand again next to the plate. "You next, little Asteria." Asteria placed a paw against the plate and held it there for longer than Kai until she jumped back. Still, on the desk, she lowered the front of her body and growled at the plate. Waving his hand once more, the plate stopped glowing. With a nod to himself, Timothy stood and shook their hand and paw. All done, allow me to congratulate you on enrolling at the Elderwood Prime Academy. I wish you both the best of luck.